I'm a big believer in second chances, even for people who commit serious crimes. Who deserves a second chance? Who gets one? And who decides? I'm Jessica Henry, and I'll be your host of Just Justice. I'm a former public defender, a professor of justice studies, and an award-winning author. And I'm excited for us to find new ways to put justice back into our criminal legal system. Hello, and welcome to Just Justice. My name is Jessica Henry, and I'll be your host. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Jennifer Soble, the founder and executive director of the Illinois Prison Project. Through IPP, Jenny leads a mission to open pathways out of prison, especially for people serving long prison sentences, people who are elderly or who have become incapacitated behind bars, and people whose voices have largely been ignored by the system. Before launching IPP in 2019, Jenny's journey spanned roles as a public defender in Washington, D.C., as a federal public defender in Indiana, a clinical law professor at Northwestern Law, and as an advocate for criminal legal reform. Jenny and her team at IPP ask us to rethink criminal legal reform. How do we bring people out of prison when their sentences no longer make any sense? How do we build legal systems that allow for compassion, change, and second chances? Jenny, I'm so excited to have you on the show. Thank you for being on Just Justice.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor.
So you founded IPP, and I'm wondering if you could sort of start with your origin story. What led you to start the Illinois Prison Project?
I came to be interested in this issue and to start an organization, which is an absolutely crazy thing to do. While I was a public defender, I had the pleasure, and on a couple of different occasions, of representing people who had served really long prison sentences and who, for various reasons, found themselves back in court. And in each case, I was really floored by what different people they were than how they'd been portrayed at their sentencing. How after 10, 15, 20 years in prison, they were just completely different people. And then I went off and I became a clinical professor. And while I was doing that, I was at Northwestern, and I had the pleasure of representing a man named Anthony Gay. And Anthony had been sent to prison in 1998 for stealing a hat from another kid. He was 19 at the time. And while he was there, he actually got probation, but he got sent to prison because he got caught driving without a license. He was supposed to do 2 years. He only had to do 50%, so he really should have been in and out within 1 year. But Anthony had a lot of mental health problems, and prison exacerbated them, as it does for so many people. And rather than coming home within a year, Anthony found himself pretty quickly thrown into solitary confinement for minor parole violations. For folks who don't know, solitary confinement is torture in this country. Anthony was held in a cell by himself, basically 24 hours a day, in abysmal conditions you would not let an animal live in. And Anthony began to decompensate. He started harming himself, really egregious acts of self-harm, a lot of cutting. He actually ended up cutting off one of his own testicles. It was
Oh, gosh.
very extreme. And I say that to give context to the other thing that Anthony did, which was he would sometimes throw water or urine or spit at correctional officers. This was never dangerous. It was just gross. And it was genuinely a cry for help and an effort to exert any kind of power that he had. Unfortunately, Anthony was prosecuted for this conduct, which was treated as a felony because he was quote unquote assaulting correctional officers. And by the time I met Anthony in 2014, he had not only been in prison for almost 20 years at that point, but he had a sentence of 101 years. So when I met Anthony, he was supposed to get out in the next century.
All for stealing a hat.
All for stealing a hat and for being, and for having his mental illness criminalized. Anthony would tell you that I promised to get him out at our first meeting. I did not promise, but I said I would try. And as it turned out, I was able to figure out, with another person at Northwestern at the time, a legal maneuver that got him out pretty quickly. So Anthony left prison in 2018. So we saved him something like 85 years of incarceration. And it occurred to me while I was representing Anthony that, had we not helped him, Anthony would be in prison to this day. And Anthony only came to find me and to write, he actually wrote my boss a letter, not even me, because he was genuinely the most tenacious person you have ever met. I have Angela Davis's cell phone number because Anthony gave it to me. He tracked down anybody and did track down everybody. But what the sort of Department of Corrections had done to Anthony and the way that they had treated him and the way that they prosecuted him, they had done to many other people. Anthony was not alone in any way, shape, or form. Those other folks were not, did not have the tenacity of Anthony and were not able to find themselves legal representation. And so when I got Anthony out of prison in 2018, I always sort of, for years, I sat with this thought that, there are other people like Anthony sitting in prison right now who should be free, but aren't because there's no one helping them. Fast forward a couple of years, I'm working at a job that I don't really love, but it's a sort of advocacy role. And what I really wanted to do was convince my boss that we should work in prisons and that we should be working in Illinois. And so in an effort to convince my boss to take on this project, I did a pretty deep dive into the prison population here in Illinois. And I was really floored by how many elderly folks were in prison, how many folks were in prison that went in as children or emerging adults. I was shocked that we had folks in prison serving life sentences on drug cases. We don't anymore. Back then, that Illinois doesn't have parole. So there's no easy, straightforward way for folks to get their sentences reviewed. And it really occurred to me that part of the problem, not the only problem, but part of the problem was that there weren't lawyers working with incarcerated people who wanted to be free for reasons other than innocence.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, really,
right?
really powerful point.
And that was sort of that was the impetus. After spending 2 weeks researching this, I woke up one wintry morning and sort of brain dumped a proposal onto a piece of paper called the Illinois Prison Project, and the rest is sort of history.
Well, it's not really history. I mean, you started that organization in your basement, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, I sure did. And that's where I'm sitting right now. So it's all, we're very full circle.
That's amazing. It's amazing. How did you, so you started this, with a Women a Dream in your basement. And now IPP is a pretty significant project in Illinois. And I'm wondering if you could sort of tell us, what does IPP do for justice impacted people in Illinois? Because it's a lot. I mean, you guys are kind of got your fingers in a whole bunch of pretty amazing criminal legal pies. Oh, that's a bad analogy, but it's true.
No, we do. I take your analogy. I think it's great.
Or metaphor. Was that even an analogy or I don't know. Go ahead, Jenny.
Simile metaphor. I'm really bad. It's not a metaphor. But I like pie. Yeah. So, when I sort of dreamt up IPP, I was working at this advocacy organization and I had previously been a public defender. So I was very acutely aware of the fact that advocates need to tell stories in order to shift policies and educate the public, but they don't have stories in far too many cases. Folks who provide direct representation have the stories and they have the clients, but they often don't have the organizational capacity to make changes at the sort of legislative or sort of agency level. And they're often very wary of talking to the press, and so aren't that well positioned to move or sway the public. And so what I really envision for IPP and what impact we do is sort of all three. So we have three buckets of work. We do public education, direct representation, and policy work. Our direct representation is sort of the easiest to is the most obvious. We represent incarcerated people who should be free. And I use the word should extraordinarily broadly. We represent clients in clemency, in medical release, in resentencing through post-conviction. We also represent them in what we call administrative advocacy with the Department of Corrections. So folks who would be free if the Department of Corrections had given them all the sentencing credit they deserved or were entitled to. who would be free if the Department of Corrections would release them on electronic monitoring, which they have the authority to do in um, genuinely tens of thousands of cases right this second. We represent, when we take on a client, we pursue every and all possible release mechanism, and then we push on all of them until our clients are home. And in 6 years, we've been able to bring home 191 people, and that number goes up every week, which is pretty cool.
Wow. That's really cool. That's a lot of people. It's a lot of people. And I'm wondering because Illinois is known for in the criminal legal space, right? I mean, it's known from some fairly egregious racial dynamics. And I'm wondering, can you talk about how you see some of those racial disparities playing out in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of our first sort of projects over here on our direct representation side was to find and represent every incarcerated person in Illinois who had gotten a life sentence, and by life we mean life, natural life, die in prison, for an armed robbery or a drug case. A lot of folks don't know that Illinois still has 3-strike sentencing. We do. In Illinois, a person is eligible for a natural life sentence if they get convicted of 3 Class X felonies. So these are, serious felonies, but not necessarily the most serious felonies. And they are only eligible for that sentence if the prosecutor chooses to seek it. Which means the prosecutor has to file a petition and petition the judge. And if once the prosecutor has established that the person has been convicted of 3 felonies, then the judge has no choice but to give a mandatory natural life sentence. You will be shocked, I'm sure, to hear that 97% of the people in Illinois serving natural life sentences for armed robberies or drug cases are Black or brown.
97%.
97%. Shocking. I'm being sarcastic.
I know you're being sarcastic, but I would like to say I'm actually shocked at how, I mean, I figured it was going to be high, very high. I did not appreciate it was going to be virtually everyone.
Yeah, virtually everyone.
Wow.
Yeah. Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And so, and this is like a good example of so the other 2 buckets of our work. So we represent all of those people. We reached out and we represent every single one of them. We've now gotten about a quarter of them home, and we're working on the rest. A lot of the reason why more haven't come home is because Governor Pritzker is not granting clemencies right now, but everybody is filed and pending. We also, our education team has been on a sort of years now long campaign at this point to educate Illinois residents and voters and community members and politicians about the fact that Illinois has 3-strike sentencing, because most people don't know. And when I say most people, I'm including folks in Springfield. Most people do not know. So to educate people both that we have this egregious sentencing law, and that the group it is most harming is people of color, communities of color. And then on our policy side, we have legislation to abolish 3-strike sentencing. So we sort of work in concert with our clients who we have freed and who remain incarcerated to educate both the community and lawmakers about this egregious law in an effort to get it reformed.
Wow. And I'm sure part of the rationale in all of your advocacy is this racial disparity. I mean, that's just, particularly when you think about the role of the prosecutor in all of it, right? Like it ultimately rests on the prosecutor and their discretion about which charges to bring and against whom. And the fact that they are consistently bringing these charges against a particular racial group is outrageous and something that needs to be illuminated, right? I mean, part of your work is just shining a light on these injustices that, to your point, nobody even knows about.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. Yeah. And in the case of the 3-strike sentencing, it's even more sort of blatant and outrageous because it's not even about the charge, right? A prosecutor can charge a person with an armed robbery and not seek a life sentence, right? It's just like an additional layer of intentional choice that prosecutors are exercising when faced with a Black defendant, especially one who chose to go to trial.
Yeah. And I mean, of course, the other piece of it too is a lot of the times people who commit armed robbery, not always, but many times they're young, right? And so there is, even from a public safety perspective, folks grow out of crime and there's really never, almost ever any need, particularly in cases like the ones you're describing, to have a life sentence. People will just naturally change, forgetting about the work that they do.
Yeah,
Um, yeah. Wow, that's outrageous. And speaking of all the folks that you have managed to get out, how many did you say again? 100 and
191. I should check our spreadsheet because every day, it ticks up, but I think we're
amazing.
at 91.
Can you tell our listeners, maybe share a story of a particular success that you're most proud of, or that maybe you think illustrates your work best?
Yeah, I'll tell the story of one client in part because there's a documentary out about him. And so if listeners are interested in watching the documentary and like meeting him and seeing me, and sort of watching him get released, you can do that. Um, his name is Ronnie Caracio. Ronnie, when Ronnie was 18 years old, and Ronnie had a very difficult, challenging life. When Ronnie was 18 years old, in 1976, he was at a party in the sort of Humboldt Park neighborhood, which is where he grew up. Ronnie is Puerto Rican, and at that time in Chicago, the racial tensions between white gangs and Puerto Rican gangs were very, very high. It was pretty dangerous. There was a lot of violence. So he's at this party. It's about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and a fight breaks out sort of about a block and a half away from the party between a white gang and a Puerto Rican gang. And Ronnie, who at this point had been drinking all night, he was not sober by any means. He comes outside and he wants to break the fight up. The fight is big. It is rowdy. It is like completely out of control. And so he takes a firearm, and he shoots it in the air above the heads of the people at the party. He shoots 4 times. In fact, 3 of the bullets lodge into the second story window, or like the second story building of the building behind the people, behind where people were fighting. And, we had everybody had the ballistics to show this. The 4th bullet, unfortunately, either came back down or wasn't quite up as high as the first 3, and it strikes somebody in the crowd. And the person that it strikes in the crowd happens to be an off-duty police officer, just like in his street clothes, who himself was coming home late, who had also stopped to try to break up the same fight. Unfortunately, that police officer dies, and Ronnie gets prosecuted and convicted at a bench trial with first-degree murder. It's worth noting that the judge who convicted and sentenced Ronnie was later found out to have been engaged in a bribery scheme exactly at the same time that Ronnie's trial is happening. So the person that judge sentenced just before Ronnie got a very sort of reduced sentence because of bribery. The judge a couple later, yeah, right? The judge a couple of decades later would commit suicide when the FBI discovered the bribery. Uh, anyway, that's in the future. So Ronnie goes to trial. He takes a bench trial in front of this judge who finds him guilty of first-degree murder, for what is quite clearly, definitely negligent, but an accident. So Ronnie gets sentenced to 200 to 600 years in prison.
Oh gosh, that's like a life sentence. That's a death in prison sentence. I mean, he's not getting out anytime.
Except this is before Illinois had abolished parole. So Ronnie gets to go before the parole board starting 11 years and 4 months into his sentence. And everyone knows this. The prosecutor knows this. The judge knows. Everybody knows it, right? Ronnie gets parole. So Ronnie starts going before the parole board in the late 80s, early 90s. And what happens at every single one of Ronnie's parole hearings is 50, 60, 70, 100 uniformed police officers show up. They stand sort of, Ronnie elbow to elbow, shoulder to shoulder, guns exposed, and they stare at the prisoner review board every time. And Ronnie does not get out of prison. This is despite the fact that Ronnie cuts all of his ties with any gang at all. Ronnie starts working with the Department of Corrections to bring programming into the prison. He starts doing every class, every job, every rehabilitative thing that there is. He is given positions of power within the prison because the prison officials themselves trust Ronnie. but the prisoner review board does not grant him release because it's not politically expedient to do so. Quite frankly, it might not be safe to do so with the sort of nature and presence of the Fraternal Order of Police. So Ronnie goes before the prisoner review board 31 times. Over
Wait, how many, like, so he gets denied, and then how long until the next parole?
Yeah. So he gets denied, and sometimes it's a year before the next hearing. Sometimes Ronnie gets what's called a set, which is basically a delay. So sometimes it's 1 year, sometimes it's 3 years, sometimes it's 5 years. And his vote count is like all over the place. It's 0 to 11, it's 6 to 7, it's 2 to 8. It's, there is no consistency, there's no logic. None of it has anything to do with Ronnie, right? There's no relationship between the board's vote and Ronnie's rehabilitation or public safety or anything. It all has to do with the politics, right? Is the board afraid of the Fraternal Order of Police at that moment? Are there members on the board who are sort of buoyed by their own sense of justice and want to vote yes and don't care that the FOP is breathing down their neck? It really is. And it's interesting in the film, there are a couple of former board members who talk about Ronnie's case and like why they voted the way they did. It's really fascinating. Anyway, I meet Ronnie in 2021 and I agree to represent him. Although at this point he's been represented by everybody. Like everybody in Chicago has represented Ronnie. It's like, it's a trope. Like, when did you represent Ronnie? Everybody's represented. And in fact, when I came onto his case, there were other lawyers who stayed on his case for various purposes, which was great because it was, at the end of the day, it was really a team effort to get him out. I represented him in front of the board. In 2022, maybe, and we are 1 vote shy. We are like 1 vote shy, which is extremely frustrating because one of the members who would have voted yes had an illness in her family, so she didn't come to the hearing.
Oh boy.
I know. It was just like, oof.
Yeah, oof, that's right.
So it was pretty bad. So we get to the next hearing the next year. And, Ronnie's only gotten stronger. He's only gotten better. In the meantime, I've gotten him transferred from a regular prison to the reentry facility in the Department of Corrections. So he's now in a prison where he can like work in the community. He can, they are not locked in. Like, if the Department of Corrections thinks that Ronnie can be here, I don't even know what to say at this point, right? Part of the reason we can have transferred there so that we can say to the board, like, look, Ronnie's at Kewanee and he's doing great. For whatever reason, the Fraternal Order of Police, represented by John Catanzara, if anyone is familiar with him. John Catanzara is the president, I think he is still the president of the Chicago Fraternal Order of Police. He has been effectively fired from the Chicago Police Department, from the Illinois State Police. He was recently let go as the Illinois Fraternal Order of Police's president. For all sorts of kinds of misconduct, racism. He called for he basically called the Fraternal Order of Police to stage an insurrection against Lori Lightfoot when she required everyone to be vaccinated. He's used a lot of explicit Muslim slurs in public. He's a bad guy. John Catanzara is a bad guy. And in the film, they interview him in his office, and he's got an old electric chair in his office as like a.
What is the name of this film?
Oh, sorry. The film is called In Their Hands. And I'm about to get to that because what happens is at the second hearing that I take him to, the Fraternal Order of Police just isn't there when we show up. They didn't get notice. And so the prisoner review board does a really bizarre thing and they decide to bifurcate the hearing. So I get to go on one day and then we're going to come back 3 months later and the Fraternal Order of Police is going to like object to Ronnie's release, at which point we knew that we were not winning. Like the gig was up. And so we decided that we needed like a new approach. And so what we did is we called in a documentary filmmaker and because we thought, if the board's not going to release Ronnie because they should release Ronnie, we're going to make them do it through public pressure. So we call in this documentary film team who starts filming from the second half of that hearing on. We lose the second half of the hearing. It is brutal. You can watch it. It was incredibly painful. The chairman of the PRB was outrageous. The thing you don't see in the film is the person sitting next to me at that hearing is the prosecutor who prosecuted Ronnie in 1976, Tom Breen. And Mr. Breen, who was not allowed to speak at all, had come with me to the hearing to ask that Ronnie be released. Sort of shocking.
Wow, that's unusual, right?
It was unusual. Yeah, everything about this case is unusual. We lose 0 to 8, just like we get obliterated, just like blown out of the water. But we use that loss, and one of Ronnie's appellate lawyer uses that loss to go to the appellate court and say what had happened before the hearing is the courts had said that Ronnie was not eligible for relief in the courts because he was eligible for parole, and that he didn't need relief through the courts because he could get out through parole. Ronnie's appellate lawyer took this
Final
brutal
rejection.
final rejection to say to the courts, the parole board doesn't mean anything. There is no logic, there is no rhyme or reason. He's doing, objectively better than he was, and he was already doing great, and he's getting a lower vote count. This process is a farce. Let him seek relief through the courts, which is what they did. And and then Ronnie got out, and you can, in the film, you can watch Ronnie get released. It's incredibly beautiful. And the very exciting thing is we hired him maybe about 2 weeks ago. So now Ronnie's a full-time staff member at IPP working as a community navigator.
Oh my gosh, that is an amazing story. I love that story. And that's wonderful for Ronnie. And, it reminds me, Ben Austin was on my show, I don't know, last season or 2 seasons ago. And he had a similar story to tell about the police lining up and, sort of undermining whatever parole process exists. So, I mean, it's an interesting thing because a lot of times, I guess maybe not so much in Illinois now because parole doesn't exist, but a lot of times judges would impose a sentence that they knew carried the possibility of parole. And they figured, oh, if this person does well in prison, they'll get out. And then the reality on the ground is parole has become such a political hot potato that
Yeah.
so many parole boards just don't use their power to release people who could be safely released, like Ronnie. And so that's an amazing thing that you were able to get a court to be like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah. No, I think that's totally right. But parole boards are political animals. They're not sort of judicial-esque fact finders as much as we want them to be. And the other thing is that parole board members are often just people. So they are former, former probation officers or former correctional officers or former police officers. They're not necessarily judges or lawyers,
Right.
right? Many of
Mhm.
them don't have any legal training whatsoever, let alone training in sort of the social sciences that we now know deeply influence whether or not a person is going to engage in criminal behavior. And so asking them to sort of judge based on their gut whether or not a person should be free or not is, I think the official term is bonkers. Like it's crazy that we do this.
The official term bonkers. But yeah, and it's a very opaque process. It's really hard to get underneath the decision making. It's very random, as you sort of pointed out. And so you're really filling an important gap by showing up and being an advocate and being creative. I mean, that's power because particularly in a state like Illinois that doesn't have parole or genuine parole processes anymore, that can be very impactful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Um, you know, when you think of somebody like Ronnie, who had been incarcerated for so many years, does IPP provide additional services for folks when they get out of prison? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we do. The short answer is, of course, we do. I really firmly believe that the best way to get a person out of prison is to help them rebuild their lives before they ever get released. As part of the work to get a person out of prison, we help figure out where they're going to live. How are they going to eat, right? Where is their sort of financial sustenance coming from? Who's their support network? Is it their family? Do they have a church group? Who can we connect them with on the outside? And we do that from the very beginning for two reasons. One, it really helps convince decision makers that they should release people. release a person in front of them if that person has a robust reentry plan already established. It just makes the sort of argument for release that much more compelling. And then the other reason we do it is because reentry is hard no matter what. And so the more that we can have established in advance, the better. I will say, like, best laid plans, right? I don't know anybody who's followed their release plan like to the letter.
Mhm.
Everybody has a hiccup. For that reason, IPP provides 6 months of case management after a person is released for all of our clients. And that includes things like we get folks their first phone, we help them, we pay for their first set of, clothing, hygiene items, stuff like that. We're actually right now trying to increase our reentry budget so that we're able to spend a little bit more on more, I guess I'll call them discretionary items, but things that aren't like absolutely crucial, but help folks who've just been released have some sense, some like autonomy and some dignity in choice so that we can we'll take people shopping and they get to buy what they want. For, a lot of clients, those with sort of histories of mental illness, but even, but also those without, because reentry is really challenging. We help get our clients connected with mental health services. We have a really robust practice representing folks who are either terminally ill or medically incapacitated. So we help folks get set up their sort of more traditional medical support services. Sometimes that's nursing homes, sometimes that's providers just in the community. And we stay with folks, we've stayed with some folks longer than 6 months for the folks who need it, but the idea is to really provide a lot of support for folks when they return.
And are you a private organization in the sense that you're not connected formally with the parole system in Illinois?
Yeah, no, we're definitely, I mean, we're a nonprofit, but yes, we are not a government entity. We have no formal relationship with any state agency. I'm just making sure that's true. Yeah, that's true. We have very close working relationships with a lot of state agencies, but we don't have any, we don't get any funding from them. We are not like a official vendor in any way.
Right. So if somebody doesn't succeed in your program, there's no mandatory reporting. There's no,
Oh
in
God.
other words, they're not mandated to you. You're there as an additional support on top of whatever limited services the state might be providing them. And then you mentioned the idea of folks getting out who are very ill. I know that is that compassionate release is a big issue that you were very intimately involved in Illinois. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of those clients I told you about who was serving a natural life sentence for an armed robbery, one of my clients in that group of folks was a really wonderful man named Joe Coleman. And pretty shortly after I started working with Joe, he was diagnosed with dementia and prostate cancer, terminal. And Joe declined unbelievably quickly from when I met him. And so, in the face of Joe's like really rapid decline, I knew that we did not have time to get him out of prison through a clemency. They take forever. We have ones pending from 2020 at this point. And so, I will say Joe was incredible. He was a Vietnam veteran. He had 6 beautiful children who as adults now, they live all over the country. They all talk every day. Like, this is a
Mm.
testament to Joe as a person. He started a nonprofit called Lifers Incorporated, where he raised money for local kids outside of his prison community. Just like a genuine gem of a person. And so I called the state's attorney and I sort of pitched, I've got this client. He's this wonderful guy. Let me tell you about him. He is dying. Instead of having him die in the prison, he has 6 children who want to care for him. Can he please die at home? And the prosecutor said, sure. And I said, great, let's go to court. And he said, not so fast. File a clemency. And I just won't oppose it. And in Illinois, there was, and it continues actually to be, no way for us to force our way back into court without the prosecutor's consent. And so we file a clemency. We put it together really quickly in a couple of days. And I wish I could say that I was kidding when I tell you that our first clemency petition got rejected by the prisoner review board because Joe had not notarized it. Joe at
Mm.
this point was like unconscious 95% of the day. He was not signing or notarizing anything. And the rules have not changed, thank goodness. So we got his son, Joe Jr. We got him hooked up with power of attorney really quickly. We like turned it all around. We made it the changes we needed to make. And because we didn't want to wait a day, right? We didn't want to wait one day for overnight mail. Joe gets in his car and starts driving to Springfield from downstate Illinois. While Joe is in his car on the way to Springfield, and while I am in the parking lot of the prison going in to see Joe Sr., we get the call that Joe was gone.
Hmm.
I mean,
I'm
it was
so
hard.
sorry.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
heartbreaking. Every time I think about it, I get like a little choked up. It was heartbreaking, and I was so angry. And rather, I was so angry, but the family was really sort of inspired to do something. They were pretty insistent that we do something. And so we wrote a law. We wrote the Joe Coleman Medical Release Act, which creates an expedited release process for incarcerated people who are terminally ill or disabled. It's a 3-month process, start to finish. And we wrote it, we designed it to be sort of the opposite of clemency. We wrote it so that people did not need lawyers to succeed in it. And that was really important to us, that we wanted this to be a really accessible process. So anybody, almost anybody can apply. An incarcerated person, their family member, their doctor, the Department of Corrections themselves, and actually the Department of Corrections is the single biggest filer, uh,
Hmm.
which is great. And so we started filing, and our clients were coming home at a pretty rapid clip. But nobody else's clients, nobody else was. Other incarcerated people who did not have lawyers were not coming home. And we, after a couple of years of data collection, we realized that the thing that was making the difference, whether a person came home or not, was the lawyer. If a person had access to counsel, the petition that got filed just looked different. It looked more robust. Somebody would come to the hearing and advocate for the person's release. And there was someone on the ground to do the legwork around reentry planning. And so since we made that realization, we have been working really tirelessly, both to represent as many incarcerated people as we can, but also to sort of recruit and train other attorneys in Illinois and across the country who will represent folks in these proceedings.
And and for our listeners, I don't know if you caught how casually Jenny was like, "So we wrote a law." I mean, that's a big deal, right? You helped craft a law that actually made its way through the Illinois legislature and then got passed and signed by the governor. Not a small feat, and you did it really quickly. And it's been an incredibly impactful law. I've done some work on research on compassionate release, and Illinois' law is definitely one of the best in the nation. So that's incredible.
Thank you.
Um, and speaking of that, so Illinois has taken some really positive steps, like around, for instance, decarceration for the elderly and the very ill. But there are still barriers, there are still obstacles. And I'm wondering if you can talk about sort of what you're still seeing on the ground, maybe what IPP's priorities are right now,
Yeah.
what reforms you're looking towards.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've definitely made some steps. I think there's so much more to do. And the back end space in Illinois and in the entire country. So I don't want Illinois to feel particularly bad about ourselves here. It has been just neglected. Like we just don't have the same advocacy infrastructure that the pretrial justice movement has, right? We're just not there yet. So things that we're thinking about a lot right now include truth in sentencing reform is really high on our list. And for folks who don't know what that is, truth in sentencing, despite its like shiny, nice name, is a really terrible set of policies and laws that prohibit incarcerated people from earning sentencing credit um, or any sort of like recognition whatsoever for their rehabilitative efforts. And so that means that if you get 100%, if you have a sentence that has to be served at 100%, you could be, Jesus walking on water in that prison, and your sentencing date remains unchanged no matter what. So we are working with a group of incredible advocates here in Illinois and some national groups to change that law. It's going to be a longer campaign. And what we're hoping to do is end up in a place where every incarcerated person has the ability to have their rehabilitation reflected in their sentence. So that means is in a position to earn good conduct credit, which is sort of additional sentencing credit that you earn for complying with all of the rules, which is great. and also programming credit. So credit for education, for working particular jobs, for completing certain programs. Um, Illinois has a really robust and quite complicated sentencing credit system as it is. And so making a couple of minor tweaks to allow everyone to fully participate in that system is a logistically straightforward matter. And now it's just about helping our lawmakers understand why everyone should have the opportunity to better themselves and that we should be acknowledging that betterment because it makes us all safer. It saves all of us money. And it genuinely honors the humanity of everybody who's locked up.
I mean, that's a big vision.
No,
It's
it's
a
like a
big vision.
small
It's
little project, little thing we're
um,
working on.
yeah, but that, I mean, and especially in a place like Illinois, that to your point, still has three strikes laws and, still has so many people serving such long sentences, that would be hugely impactful. And I'm confident, given your track record, that you'll get it done at some point.
I
Um,
hope.
you know, and I guess as we sort of bring this interview or this conversation to a close, I'm just wondering, Jenny, you're just so energetic and inspiring, but you also get tired because this work is so hard. And I'm just wondering, how do you personally balance sort of the deeply rewarding nature of the work with just the difficulty? Like, how do you stay hopeful in the face of some really significant systemic obstacles in front of you?
Oh man, yeah, I'm so tired. I also have a teenager, which I just like, as you know very well, because we've talked about this. Um, I don't know. I think I'm like very fortunate to be wired in such a way where hope is just like it's my default. I look at our really messed up criminal legal system that we made. Like, it's not chemistry or physics or gravity. We made this system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like we created it. It is not positive law. Like we did this. And that means that we can undo it, right? With a couple strokes of a pen, you could release everybody. Like it's just I know that people see the criminal legal system as this, sort of like looming, hulking, immovable, unchangeable pit of despair. And I just see a bunch of laws that a bunch of like white dudes wrote 40 years ago. And I just don't see any reason why we couldn't change them all. So that helps. That helps a lot. I'm incredibly lucky that I get to spend a lot of time with a lot of unbelievably inspiring, joyful, funny, sarcastic, brilliant folks who survive the system. I say sarcasm because I love sarcasm. Um, and I'm really buoyed by them and their sort of optimism and joy. Um, and so I've always, even when IPP was just me, I was always part of this like larger community of folks who both really deeply understood the pain of the criminal legal system and saw a million different ways in which we could make it better. And so I hold on to that. And I also, for me, hope is sort of like it's like a mantra. I have a hope tattoo on my arm.